I'm Angela Wolf, fashion designer and pattern designer. When you're packing your bags for that tropical destination, well, what kind of top do you bring? You're going to want a sweater or a jacket at the restaurants usually. So a sleeve like this might add too much bulk underneath your jacket. A tank is great, but what if you start sweating? Then you mess up your lining. So what about changing a great pattern and adding a cap sleeve? Then you could take your jacket off and you always look great. So here I have, this is my favorite pattern that I use for all of my knit tops, and the only thing I want to change is the sleeve. So if your pattern comes with just a long sleeve or a short sleeve, I'm going to show you how simple it is to change this. A cap sleeve is a little bit shorter than a regular standard sleeve, and depending on how you want it to fit, you might have it curve up on your arm a little bit. You just want it to cover that little section here and enough right here that it'll look nice under a jacket. It's nice and tight. So here is my basic sleeve, the same as the long sleeve. I wanted to show you both in case your sleeve pattern or your t-shirt pattern doesn't have a long sleeve. I'm going to give myself a guide. So this is where, right underneath your arm. So you have to visually decide where on the pattern so you understand where everything goes. That's right underneath here, and you want to be at least an inch away from there because we're going to need to hem. So what I do is line up my ruler, 1 inch. So if I were to turn that hem up right now, then I would have that much extra room underneath of the armpit. If you want to go less, you can go less, like to a 1/2 inch. And that's the one we're going to use as a guide. And I just want to show you how to change the pattern. If that's going to be my hem, I'm going to flip this up. Right along that line. And I think you'll see what I'm talking about now. When this is turned up as a hem, which I will cut this off because we only need a 1/2 inch hem allowance. See the difference? You don't need all that extra fabric sticking out if this was your actual pattern. So I'm going to cut that off. And you can have whatever distance you want for a hem allowance, but a 1/2 inch is just fine for the sleeves. You just don't want it coming up above here. And the other part, if I flip this over, notice that this section does not meet at the edge of the sleeve. So what I'll do is I will tape this in place and give myself just a little bit wider hem allowances on the side. So now when I were to flip this up, if I just cut the paper like this, keeping your hands out of the way, and cut it like this, get that out of the way here. Cut that out of the way. So my new pattern, you can see how the hem on the sides here, see how that angles out? And I would just trim this exactly where it was in the first place. Looks like a little bit of a waste of paper there, so I could do a lot of alterations on sleeves with the excess paper. Here we go. So when this flips up to hem, the sides will meet. So you can see my little extra fabric right here. Get that back under there. So that's how simple it is. You can also curve this up a little bit if you'd like to. This can curve up however you want to. When you curve it, just make sure that the hem allowance meets. The other big trick is the shorter the sleeve for a cap sleeve, you really want to press up your hem allowance before you sew together the shirt. It just makes it easier in the long run. So here I have 2 sleeves. This is my regular standard sleeve. So let's just say you cut out your top, one that you already have, and you decided that, oh, I want to do that cap sleeve. You could take your original sleeve pattern and just slide up your hem and press. Your sides might not meet, but you could take it in just a little bit on the side seam and then you'll be fine. So if this was your regular pattern and you wanted a cap sleeve, just press it up higher and trim away your excess hem allowance, okay? So that saves one shirt. Now, if I already cut this out correctly, all I'm gonna do is turn up this hem allowance, give it a little steam, use the tailor's clapper to make a nice crisp hem, because once I'm sewing, I can just flip this right into the sewing machine. And the other part, especially if you're making this, you have small arms, or you're making this for children, when this is all sewn together, that's a real small area to get into to press. So it's all finished now. So let's go sew. So here I have the shirt, and I've already pinned together the front to the back. That's the first part of sewing your top together. And I've already done that on another sheet here, but What about if you don't have a serger? If you have a serger, you could run it through the serger, it finishes the seams and it stretches. But what about just sewing? Well, here I have a sample of fabric. Here's a straight stitch, and this is with thread that stretches just a little bit. If you have thread that stretches, then you can use a straight stitch because it stretches with your fabric. If you don't have thread that stretches, then you need to do a real small zigzag or what they call a stretch stitch. And see the difference? See how when that stretches, the stitches don't rip out. So I'm going to use stretch thread with a straight stitch, and I've already tested the length. I'm going to use a 2.5. And what I have here on my shirt, I've already finished half of this for you so you can see what's going on here. I finished my shoulders and I've attached my sleeve. I do that before I attach the side seam. And this is the part that I was telling you about. There isn't much room here. So if this is my sleeve, you can see that it's already pressed. You can see the pressed edges. I'm going to line up my seam right here. And I'm just going to stitch. I'm going to start with a little back stitch and then go forward. If you're having a problem with a real thin fabric like that, getting stuck at the edge, start in about 1/4 of an inch or even 1/8 of an inch. So you're not starting at the edge of the fabric because it'll embed into your foot right there. It kind of makes it messy. So I'm just stitching with a straight stitch all the way down the side seam. Being sure not to stretch the fabric. I don't want to stretch the fabric as it goes through. And just line up your fabric and stitch. And all the way to the hem. You might notice that I already have the hem pressed as well because it just makes it a lot faster when it gets time to hemming. Little back stitch and finished. Now, if I were going to ruche the tee, I would do that now with a basting stitch, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to leave this a regular t-shirt to lay nicely under a jacket and see how this seam stretches and it doesn't break the thread. So now all I have to do is flip these over. This is the sleeve. There isn't a lot of room there. And I'm going to hem this. You could hem it with a cover hem. We're going to do it with a twin needle with a sewing machine. And I'm also going to hem the bottom of the shirt. I've changed the needle to a twin needle. So I have 2 spools of thread that's run through the machine, threaded exactly the same, and one goes through the right needle and one goes through the left needle. I'm going to make a few changes to the machine. I'm going to tell the machine I'm using a twin needle. Then I don't accidentally choose the wrong stitch and break a needle. I'm using a straight stitch that's set down the center, and I'm going to change the stitch length to a 4.0. Again, be sure to test it. So here is the seam that we just finished. Again, I'm going to use contrasting threads so you can see what I'm doing. I'm trimming off some excess. This part here is a serge seam that I did earlier. What I was comparing the serged to just a regular stitch. Because this is pressed, I can just flip this under. And I'm going to start at the underarm seam, line up my presser foot right on the edge of the fold because I have a real narrow hem allowance, and just start stitching. When you get to the underarm seam, you can either press it towards the back or press it open, whatever you prefer, and just keep going around. Be very careful not to stretch your fabric. And again, I'm using stretch thread, so I'll even have a little extra stretch. But even if you don't have stretch thread, you can use any thread for the twin needle. And what this stitch is doing is it looks kind of like sportswear on the outside, and on the back side is a zigzag stitch because you only have one bobbin thread and 2 threads on top. Get back to the front here, do a little back stitch. And I'm going to trim this off. You can see I use the 2 different threads so you can compare. So on the front side of this t-shirt, for my hem, I have 2 rows of stitching. That looks very professional. It stretches so you can get it over your arm and you can move around comfortably. And on the back side is just a zigzag stitch. Now, I can go back and trim off this, which is what I would do. And this is the tricky part. Be very careful because if you snip wrong, you could cut through your t-shirt. I just fold this to the back, use a sharp pair of scissors, and just glide your scissors along where you sew. And you'll notice that most of this t-shirt fabric will kind of fold. See how it's rolling anyways? So just line up your scissors right in that fold and snip. And you'll do that all the way around the hem. And what that does is that trims it a little bit closer. This fabric does not fray, so I don't have to worry about that coming undone. And my hem is finished. So that's how simple it is to add a cap sleeve, and you can alter any t-shirt pattern to do this, or actually any shirt pattern to make a nice short sleeve. This is short enough, it'll fit under a jacket, it fits into your suitcase, and then when you take your jacket off, you still look great.